Where are we on the shutdown? What might cause this actual shutdown? What is it that the Republicans want or won't do? What is it that Democrats want and won't do?
So right now, both sides aren't really talking to each other. They're sort of in this weird waiting game at the moment as we get closer to midnight. Now, I think the Democratic, from their perspective, there are two wants going into this shutdown. The first is really being driven by the House progressives, and that is they want to be seen being very tough in combating President Trump on his policies. The other thing they want is they want an extension to ACA or Obamacare subsidies that are going to be expiring at the end of the year. From the Republican perspective, their wants are a little bit different. They've already passed via the House what is known as a clean CR that gets us through November 20th. And generally speaking, the party that passes that clean CR feels that they have a moral high ground. Now, I woke up this morning thinking that there was a chance that we would not go into a government shutdown and that something would happen to make a deal. But as we get closer and closer to midnight, it begins to sound like both parties feel that they are in the best political position possible and that both sides think that a shutdown will end up helping them politically. And that's usually what happens when you have a shutdown. So if a shutdown does occur, we'll wake up tomorrow and we'll have to deal with the short-term impacts because I don't think this is going to go more than a week or so. I think really the next real negotiation point, if the government shuts down, will be next week when the House Republicans return.
Well, Nathan, what are the political implications of a government shutdown? You said both sides think that a shutdown will help their own side, but what are the implications? We have a little bit of history to look to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the best case scenarios is go back to the Tea Party of 2013. And there's this very similar playbook that it's happening to that. Now, from the Democratic perspective, they want to be able to essentially combat President Trump. Their approval ratings, not that good at the moment. And, there's plenty of time between now and November 2026 to be able to turn that messaging and at least start to build momentum off of that. Now, there is some local politics here at play. Virginia and New Jersey both have governor races in November. I would anticipate if President Trump and the Office of Management and Budget were to begin to follow through with mass firings of government workers, that's going to impact Virginia and Maryland pretty significantly. I would expect those policymakers to come in and say, maybe we should stop this and turn things around here. But if the shutdown occurs and Democrats start to take the blame, then I think you'll see those politicians in Virginia and New Jersey get a little nervous.
It's like you just delivered a ball into my court perfectly. You mentioned the OMB, which takes us to Russell Vogt. Max, you wrote an in-depth profile earlier this year, back in April. It was a big take. You talked about the architect behind President Trump's imperial presidency. Vogt, not usually out in front in the Oval Office or at a White House press conference, and yet he was yesterday afternoon, along with the Republican leadership. He was front and center. He went to the mic, made some comments outside the White House after that meeting in the White House with minority leaders. Remind us who this guy is. He's very, very influential when it comes to the Trump White House.
Yeah, as you said, Carol, he is the head of the Office of Management and Budget. But I think more importantly, he is one of these kind of behind the scene intellectuals who helped shape this presidency, who worked on Project 2025, who basically after Trump's last term spent 4 years essentially planning for what this presidency was going to look like. And Trump, and we talked about this a lot, at the beginning of the year, but Trump was unusual because all these people around him had a long time to plan. And a big part of the plan, of course, is massive cuts to the budget and massive cuts, crucially, to the federal workforce. We saw a little bit of that, or more than a little, I'd say, with Doge and Elon Musk's efforts, and this has been going back and forth. But a budget shutdown, a government shutdown, would be a huge opportunity for Vogt and for people who are sort of aligned in this direction to do something that they've wanted to do for a very long time, which is essentially take a bite out of the federal government.
So what is this opportunity, Max, for him, for his role at OMB, but also his role in Project 2025 and shaping what he wants the presidency to look like? So
the ideological idea is that there is this kind of like fourth branch of government, like, you sometimes hear people talk about the deep state or something like that. This is the idea that there are civil servants who are operating outside of the realm of the president, who are just doing whatever they want. This is an attack, of course, that Donald Trump sort of pioneered during his first presidency when he would complain about the deep state. And Vogt's idea is to weaken this, and weaken it both by making it more responsive to the president. And like that's a key part. When you hear people talk about the unitary executive idea, it's the idea that the president, not these quote unquote unelected bureaucrats, should be deciding what the government does. But also because there's going to be there's they've wanted to fire people for a long time, and you're going to have a government shutdown. You could imagine Vogt and others inside of the Trump administration seeing this as an opportunity to do something very drastic and blame it on the Democrats and be able to say, hey, this wasn't, because it didn't really work during the Doge episode, because people got mad at Elon Musk, and you had a lot of Democrats sort of beating the drum about saying, oh, you're waiting for Social Security to talk to somebody at the Social Security office. That's Elon Musk did that, and that made Musk very unpopular. It also caused Trump to kind of back off. He had talked initially about using a chainsaw, and then he was like, oh no, we're actually using a scalpel. But now, if we have a government shutdown and the Trump administration is able to blame it on Democrats, then maybe that gives them the ability to try to do something more drastic they weren't able to do earlier.
So Nathan, come in. How exactly do these job cuts work in a government shutdown? And this isn't just something specific to a Trump White House, right? I mean, does any president have the ability to cut jobs, cut costs, if you will, in a government shutdown?
Well, obviously this is a new legal issue that's going to most likely come up if it happens. But one thing that we've already noted is that Russ Vought, when he's provided guidance to agencies in terms of deeming who is essential and who is not essential, he said specifically that those individuals that are working on reduction in force plans should be deemed essential. And there's this theory out there that if the Congress isn't available to essentially do its job, then the White House has to come in and step in and do it for them. So I would say, though, that right now we're in the state between the Republicans and Democrats where both sides are essentially talking past each other, and there's a lot of threats going on. But I would also remind folks that Doge cuts weren't popular with just the average American because of the reasons Max was laying out there. And so even though you're hearing threats like 750,000 government workers will be furloughed and a lot of them may not come back, there is this ultimate decision that's going to be made by the president. And if Congress comes together and makes a deal by, say, early next week, I think they'll be able to get in front of the OMB and stave off a lot of these job cuts.